Hello, my name is Anna Queiroz, and I'm a postdoc researcher at Stanford University. I have a joint appointment at the Virtual Human Interaction Lab, where I lead the educational efforts, and also at the Graduate School of Education in the Stanford Accelerator for Learning, where I lead the workforce training. So it's a great pleasure to be with you today. And to start our presentation, I will share some slides that I prepared to guide our talk today. So here you're going to have my email, and I think in all the slides you're going to get that. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Our agenda today, first, I will talk a little bit about the motivation to talk, to research virtual reality, and then some of the findings I had from the literature that supported the research framework that guided all my experimental research. And after that, with enough findings that could support social good initiatives and how I am now in terms of research and what are the plans for the future. So for motivation, as a good PhD student, first thing I did was to just read everything that was out there about virtual reality, every type of application, and then summarizing all this literature on systematic literature reviews. So about virtual reality in marketing, for climate change awareness, in education, for learning assessment, and even on corporate education and training. And what I found was that, first, when we talk about VR, we have to be clear what type of knowledge that we are targeting. So if it's a procedural knowledge, it means a knowledge that needs to be repeated several times, requires that type of memorization. So for example, organizing in a store, VR usually is better than other media. But if we are targeting conceptual knowledge, that means more abstract concepts that requires acquisition of new information, comparing that information with what we already have, then usually VR and other media, they kind of have the same or similar impact on recall. And what really changes the outcome is the design of the experience. Also, I found that VR was better than other media in enhancing environmental attitude and behavior. Also, the same thing for psychological aspects of learning. So, for example, students reported more often higher engagement in VR experiences than other media or learning methods, and the same for self-efficacy. And I also found that there was a lack of multi-user studies, and that is also because the technology was not ready for that yet until 3 years ago. And finally, this concentration of VR implementations in developed countries and a lack of studies in countries in development, for example, such as Brazil. And that guided me for what would build my research framework. So I focused on looking for studying how we learn in VR when the information that we are targeting is conceptual. So more abstract information, more narrative-based experiences, how we could use VR to collect and use those objective measures and how it relates to learning. So for example, in VR, we can collect data on head movements, on hand movements, even translation. So how much the student walk around during the experience and how that would correlate with learning. How we could use all those information to automate assessment and have real-time assessment. And finally, find and longitudinal studies that were also a gap in the literature targeting those type of studies, and how we could use VR in an actable way targeting diversity. So those were the main research directions. that led me to this research framework. So I built all my research targeting how VR could impact social aspects, cognitive aspects, and behavioral aspects of human interaction, learning, and especially related to the environment as well, climate change behavior. So starting with the cognitive aspects of learning, the first thing I did was to run a media comparison study where I compared VR with the same experience, but being watched on a computer monitor. So I used 360 degrees videos here from our lab, the Coral Compass and the Crystal Reef. Both videos target ocean acidification and climate change and human impacts on the ocean and biodiversity. And I worked with middle school students here in Bay Area, had two groups. So one group experienced those experiences using the VR headset, and the other group used a computer monitor. And what I found, and for more details on the methods and the variables I investigated, please feel free to read the papers that are cited here on the bottom of the slide. So the findings I had was that participants in VR, they reported higher knowledge creation. It means that they were more creative on the open-ended questions compared to participants that were on the monitor condition. And also, I investigated how the mechanisms of learning would happen in VR. So first, I found that participants in VR, they scored higher for self-efficacy than participants on the computer monitor condition. And on a follow-up study, I was interested on understanding this mechanism. So I also investigated what I called learning agency. That's how much the participants feel able to control their own learning experience. They feel more on top of their learning process. And what I found was that learning agency was mediating this relationship between the conditions and self-efficacy, meaning that being in VR increased how much participants felt learning agency, and that increased their self-efficacy, and self-efficacy is how much they felt able to learn. So on a follow-up study, I was interested on how can the design of the experience impact climate change related perceptions and behaviors. And for that, I created a study. This was a large scale study where I had 16 different versions of the same VR experience. And the experience here was the Stanford Ocean acidification experience. And where I manipulated those 4 variables. So I manipulated segmentation. It means that some experiences, some conditions, they had pauses in between the scenes in the experience, and some conditions, participants would just go straight through the experience. And the reason for that is that from the cognitive load theory perspective, there are this assumption that VR is a very rich environment, and it's a 360-degree sphere with a lot of stimuli that can sometimes be overloading, and that could harm learning. So my question here was in terms of the design. So if I add some segments in which participants in between them, they can have a pause and think about what they are learning, that may increase how much they will recall about the information. I also manipulated movement. So in some conditions, participants were walking around during the experience. In some conditions, they were seated using just virtual laser to select and interact with the content. Also, we had some conditions where the voiceover was a female voiceover, and some conditions it was a male voiceover. And the reason for here is that there are some literature pointing to saying that when we are learning about science, Usually there is a higher recall if the voiceover is from a man. And if we are receiving instructions, usually we comply more if the narration is a female narration. And also, I manipulated the framing of the experiences. So for some conditions, participants heard linked experience with climate change. So they would hear the word climate change 3 times throughout the whole experience. And for other conditions, they would just hear about ocean acidification. So for this study, I was one of the first VR studies ran remotely. And for that, we had to develop a way to collect data securely remoted. So we had all the data being recorded directly to the cloud. So movement data from the hand controllers and the headset going directly to the cloud. And from the cloud, I could access. So only my computer would access the data. And that allowed us to have study sites in different areas of the United States, Canada, Denmark, and UK. And that was one of the goals of this project, to have a diverse population of participants. So we could definitely investigate how the design of the experience would impact on climate change related perceptions and behaviors. And finally, I collected data about the movement. So those are the type of movements that we collected and analyzed. So the yaw, pitch, roll, and translation, both of the heads and the hand controllers. So what did we find? We found that segmentation had no effects on learning. We found that participants that were on the male narration condition, they reported higher presence, regardless of their own gender or sex. We also found that there was an increasing on recall on participants that were on the ocean acidification condition compared to the climate change condition, meaning that participants that were on the ocean, just heard about ocean acidification, never had the experience linked to climate change, they scored higher on the learning assessments. And for movement, we found this interesting paradoxical effect of movement on learning. While movement was positively correlated with self-efficacy, it was negatively correlated with learning, meaning that participants that were moving more, they were probably exploring more, and the narration was secondary for them. So they recalled less information than participants that were moving less. So we also had this interesting finding from the perspective of climate change behavior. So usually we think some research, they especially more on the implications, they emphasize that learning would impact behavior directly. But what we have been finding in the recent years is that usually learning alone is not enough to change our behavior related to climate change. And then here we found that risk perception was mediating this relationship, meaning that as more participants learned about the environment, about ocean acidification, more they perceived the risk of human activities on the health of the ocean, and more it impacted their behavior for a more pro-environmental behavior. And then focusing on the social aspects of learning, and with, the evolution of VR, the metaverse, and now being very easy to connect with people in the same VR environment, I was interested on how and what are the implications of these multi-user, immersive, and interactive experiences. So here I already knew that moving more was harming learning, but was increasing self-efficacy. And I was curious if being in a VR environment with other 6, 7 people, having to deal with the hand controllers and also with the VR environment, what would be the impacts on learning, the impacts on how I feel connected to others in the environment, and so on. So here is a quick video of what participants did. For this experience, we used the Engage platform, and we had 3 different conditions. So in the first condition, that would be the control conditions, participants would just sit down, put the headset on, and go through experience in group, all 6 or 7 participants in the same VR environment, but they were not prompted to interact with each other. They were just watching this experience about coral reefs. And then on the other condition, we added some pauses in between some scenes, and we asked participants to discuss, only discuss about what they were learning. And on the third condition, during those pauses, we asked participants to build a reef. So we placed 3D models on the virtual environment. They learned how to manipulate the objects, and then they could duplicate, bring more 3D models, and then create this coral reef. So here's a video showing the participants, real participants in action. So you can see the participant is, moving the dolphin on the back. This one in front here is duplicating the fishes. And so this way they could customize their virtual environment and create a coral reef with the biodiversity that they were learning about. And they could interact with each other, they could help each other. Several times we could see participants going close the avatar to the other and helping with the hand controllers and so on. And you can also have more details about this study on the paper that was just published recently, just following this reference on the bottom of the slide. Okay, so then what did I found? So I found, so I investigated learning first. I investigated with multiple choice questions before and after the VR experience, investigated self-efficacy, that's how much the participants felt that they were able to learn. I investigated group cohesion, so how much they felt that they were part of the group, how much, the members of the group, they felt that the members of the group were bonded, and also how much they felt active in the environment, because they were, able to, in some conditions, to manipulate objects. The first condition, no. The second, they would just talk to each other. And the third one, they could really manipulate 3D objects in the virtual environment. And what I found was that related to learning, collaboration had a positive effect. So on the condition where participants collaborated in creating this virtual environment together, they recalled more information. And that feeling active and feeling more bonded to the group negatively correlated with learning. And for us, the explanation for that is, as more as they were active and as more as they were paying attention to other members of the group, and this was a group that they did not know each other before the VR experience. So as more they were focusing their attention in exploring and interacting with others, learning was secondary. So that's why they probably recalled less information. But as more as they collaborated and received support from the others, that increased how much they learned. And then, so on a summary, what would be the implications of those researchers in practice? So first, when we think about the social impacts of virtual environments, we saw that collaboration can support learning in virtual environments. We also found that VR shows to have a positive impact on high-level cognition, meaning the the creativity and knowledge creation compared to other media. Also, VR has a positive impact on self-efficacy and agency. And when we think about the behavior in and outside VR, it's important to consider the gender of the narration. So, for example, we found that male narration increased the feeling of presence. It's important to remember that risk perception is enhanced in virtual environment, and it's showed to mediate the relationship between learning and behavior in VR. And also it's important to consider the framing of the experience, especially when we are targeting climate change behavior. So based on all of that, and I'm from Brazil, I always wanted to bring back to my country. So what I did, I put together this project that was an amazing opportunity to interact with schools all over the country. So to do that, I raised money with nonprofit organizations in Brazil. And then I trained teams to go and travel through all these schools. So I had about 48 municipal schools joining the project. Those schools are the ones that receive less funding from the government, so from very low income communities as well, with about 11, almost 12,000 students receiving VR experiences in their classrooms and working closely with about 600 teachers. So for this project, there is a short video here that shows the main idea of that. So when we think about virtual reality, it's very important to consider equity and diversity. So if we analyze the last 40 years of efforts in education, especially considering achievement gap in education, what we find is that in the last 40 years, we had an incredible advancement on technologies. But instead of reducing this gap just increased in the last 40 years. So that means that we are not applying technology to reduce this gap, to increase equity, to bring rich experiences for those who would not have the opportunity to have that. So I want to change that, and we can change that through VR, because VR is a powerful technology that makes you feel in the virtual environment, you know, the concept of presence that helps you to have first-hand experiences in environments that would be maybe impossible to visit. So for example, some of the students in this project, they were from the very central area of Brazil that are thousands of miles from the ocean, they would never, or they would have a very small probability to visit the ocean in the next years. So that was, most of them have never visited or been in the ocean before this VR experience. So this is a way to bring them firsthand experiences, to explore, to feel immersed on that, and in a way that we can reduce the gap. But for that to happen, we have to work with nonprofits, with the government, with for-profit, and get funds to have this equipment and curated very good experiences available for them. So that's what I did in this project. And I also had a research component on that. So I compared this time VR to this the most similar of the VR experience on a printed material. So it was the transcript of the narration of the 360-degree videos that they had in VR with some pictures. So some of the participants just read about, climate change and humans' activities, impacts on the ocean, and some of them had the VR experience. And of course, at the end of the study, when I had finished collecting data, I switched the conditions so all participants could read about that and all participants on the project could have the VR experience. And what I measured again learning, and comparing the pre and post test, I found that both groups increased their learning significantly from pre to post. And I also measured self-efficacy and agency again. And what I found replicates what I've been finding in other studies here in the United States, that participants in other conditions that are not VR, usually they feel less able to learn and they feel less in control of their learning after the learning activities. But in VR, after the VR activity, they feel more able to learn and they feel more capable to controlling their learning pace and how they learn. And again, I found, I investigated the mechanism of learning in VR, and I found that immersion led to more self-efficacy, and that this relationship was mediated by agency, meaning that participants in VR, they felt more agency over their learning, more active, and that reflected in more self-efficacy. So here there are two videos I would like to show you that are the perceptions of the students and after the teachers about the project, about the VR experience. So that was, this study was part of a documentary in Brazil about innovation and future of education. So we had the reporter going to one of the schools and interviewing the students and teachers. So I would just show very quickly those videos for you.
Foi a primeira vez que eu vi um óculos virtual na minha vida. Você nunca tinha visto um óculos virtual? Gostou? Você já tinha aprendido sobre mar desse jeito? Não, nunca. Você já foi pra praia? Sim. E é a mesma coisa que você viu hoje? Não. Não? Qual foi a diferença? A diferença é se você não precisa se preocupar com a respiração, se você passa mais tempo lá e ver tudo que é bom, tudo que é bom debaixo d'água. Aí eu acho que é melhor para a gente aprender. Tipo, aí nunca a gente vai esquecer da nossa vida, nunca da primeira vez, sempre da primeira vez a gente nunca esquece.
And then now the teacher, the perceptions of the teacher about having this technology in the classroom to support climate change, education, and science education in general.
Experiência assim, incrível, porque nos aproxima daquilo que a gente trabalha, torna assim possível. A gente fala de oceano, mas as crianças não tinham dimensão do que seria um oceano, o fundo do mar, os efeitos causados, né, pelas nossas ações negativas. Então isso daí aproximou com aquilo que a gente já trabalha em sala de aula.
All right. And then this activity, like the VR activity, was integrated into the curriculum with several other activities throughout the year with the students. And one of those activities at the end of the year was creating an art piece that would reflect what they learned with the VR experience, with the project throughout the year. And those are some examples of the students. They were middle and high school students that joined the project. So as I mentioned, about 12,000 students. And then the project was really well received here in the United States. It received an award from the Stanford King Center on Global Development for its social impact that it brought in supporting global development. And then now and next, so what I'm doing now, what's the future of our research here in the lab and what we are interested in. So with networked VR experiences being more accessible, with teachers learning how to use this technology, one of the studies I'm very excited about that we just launched this week is a longitudinal study to investigate the integration of this technology in the classroom in social VR activities, where the students, they can interact with other students from their own classroom and students from other schools, other countries. And we are interested on the cognitive, social, and emotional aspects of VR. So here, just a quick video of one of the classes where the students were together in the virtual environment while they were also together in the real environment, and that's in their school. So this project is running on public schools here in California, and we expect to have it and collect the data throughout the year. Also, I'm working on workforce training using VR. So that's on the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. That's an initiative that I'm leading where we are using VR to develop soft skills. So in these experiences, what is very interesting about that is that you put the headset on, so you embody a manager, and then you interact with an employee in front of you. So this image that you can see is the employee in front of you, and then you receive instructions about the interaction. Everything is recorded, everything that you say, all your hand and head movements. And after you finish the conversation, so in this case, for example, a performance review meeting, when you finish that, then you change the place, and then you see yourself on the place of the employee on the other side of the table, and then you can see yourself talking and interacting, and then you can reflect on what you're saying, how you communicate, and how to better communicate. So for this study, we are wrapping up the results, and what we compared was if you have received feedback and you review your interaction, how it changes compared to just interacting in VR. So all conditions are in VR. So thank you so much for the opportunity to show my work with you today. You're going to see my email on the left side of the screen, and here you have a QR code for my LinkedIn account. Sometimes it's easier to connect there and keep contact. LinkedIn is where I always post results of our studies, new publications. So it's a very easy way to keep in touch. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the conference. And please reach out if you have any questions. Bye-bye.